Fear is a spirit. Give it the one order it has to obey. Here is where Kenyon would start, with a verse he leaned on again and again, from the second letter to Timothy, chapter 1, verse 7. It says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And feel what that verse is actually doing. It does not call fear a mood. It does not call it a personality trait or a bad day. It calls it a spirit. And Kenyon would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? You have spent years trying to talk yourself out of a feeling, arguing with it, begging it, reasoning with it at 2 in the morning, when the Word told you plainly you were never dealing with a feeling at all. You were dealing with a spirit, and a spirit does not answer to your reasoning. It answers to authority. It answers to a command spoken by someone who has the legal right to give it, which is exactly why your old way of fighting fear never worked. You were negotiating with something that was never designed to negotiate. It was designed to obey. Say it with me. Fear has no lease on this house. I speak, and it has to obey the word. I stand today in power and love and a sound mind. Fear, you must go now. Again, fear has no lease on this house. I speak, and it has to obey the word. I stand today in power and love and a sound mind. Fear, you must go now. If you want tomorrow's teaching to find you the way this one just did, stay close and subscribe so it can reach you. And if something in you just went quiet while you said that, if some old tired part of you finally exhaled, then type the 2 words "I'm ready" in the comments right now. Let it be your seal on what you just spoke. Not a comment for me, a decision for you. The first law is, name the thing correctly before you try to remove it, because you cannot evict a tenant you have not identified. And Kenyon taught plainly that fear operates as a spirit, a force with intention, not a chemical accident, and not simply a feeling that floats through you like weather. And think for a moment about how a doctor works. A doctor does not hand you medicine for a vague ache. A doctor runs tests, asks questions, presses on the exact spot until the ache has a name, because treatment without a diagnosis is just guessing in the dark. And this is precisely where most people live with fear, guessing in the dark, calling it stress, calling it a bad night, calling it just how I am wired. And every one of those labels keeps you from ever reaching for the authority that only responds to the right name. Picture a woman lying awake before a big presentation, her chest tight, her mind racing through every way tomorrow could go wrong. And for years she called this nerves, just nerves, something to breathe through, something to push past. And pushing past it never actually worked. It just came back the next time with a new occasion to attach itself to: a doctor's appointment, a phone call from her son, a quiet house at midnight, always a new occasion, the same old presence. And nothing changed for her until the night she finally stopped calling it nerves and asked what Kenyon would have asked: what is actually standing at this door? And the honest answer was a spirit, not a mood she owned, not a personality trait stitched into her, a visitor, uninvited, knocking. And the instant she named it that way, something shifted. Because you cannot serve an eviction notice on weather, but you can serve one on a visitor. Weather has no address to send anything to. Weather simply happens to you, and you simply endure it. But a visitor at your door has a name, has an intention, and has to answer when the rightful owner of the house speaks. This is the quick win, hiding inside this first law. It costs you nothing. It requires no special training. It only requires honesty about what you have actually been dealing with all these years. So this week, the next time that familiar tightness rises, stop reaching for the soft word first. Stop saying just nerves, just stress, just how I am. and instead ask the plain question, what is knocking right now? Name it a spirit, out loud if you can, quietly if you must, and notice how different the ground already feels under your feet the moment the fog gets a name. My decree is, I call you by your true name, spirit of fear, and you have no right here. The second law is, spirits obey words, not intentions. And this is where Kenyon's whole teaching on the authority of the spoken word becomes so practical. He pointed again and again to the storm on the sea, where the master did not meditate on peace or hope the wind would settle. He spoke directly to it, "Peace, be still," and it obeyed a command, not a feeling of calm radiating outward. And notice what that story does not say. It does not say he closed his eyes and tried to feel less afraid until the wind matched his mood. The sea did not respond to his internal state at all. It responded to his voice. And Kenyon taught that this is the exact pattern for every believer, not something reserved for one man in one boat 2,000 years ago. Think about how differently you have handled fear your whole life. You have wished it away, hoped it away, tried to feel your way out of it, journaled about it, distracted yourself from it. But wishing is not a legal instrument, and a spirit does not recognize a wish as an order. It recognizes a spoken word, backed by authority. A wish is something you send inward. A command is something you send outward. And only one of those two things a spirit is built to obey. Picture the version of you rehearsing a bad diagnosis in your head at midnight, running the worst outcome over and over in silence, staring at the ceiling and replaying the doctor's tone of voice, turning it into 3 different tragedies before sunrise. That silent rehearsal feels harmless, because no one can hear it. But it is not neutral at all. It is actually feeding the very spirit you want gone, because fear is listening for what you will say, not what you privately feel. Your private feeling is invisible even to you most days, but your words are not invisible to what is standing at the door. So here is the practical shift Kenyon would hand you. When fear rises about the bill sitting unopened on the counter, the appointment circled on the calendar, the phone call you keep avoiding, you stop rehearsing it silently in your head and you speak out loud, even in a whisper if that is all the courage you have in that moment. I will not receive this. Be silent now, because a whispered command backed by the word carries more weight in the spirit than a shouted argument with your own nerves. Volume was never the requirement. Authority was. Think of a parent standing in a doorway at night, telling a child there is nothing under the bed. The parent does not need to shout it. The calm certainty in the voice does the work that volume never could. That is the register Kenyon meant. Quiet, settled, final. It is not a feeling you are managing anymore in the privacy of your own head. It is an order you are issuing out loud into the room. My decree is, I speak, and what I speak carries authority. Fear cannot ignore. The third law is, you cannot win a fight on the fear's home ground. And Kenyon drew a sharp line between what he called sense knowledge and revelation knowledge. Sense knowledge is everything you gather through eyes, ears, nerves, the shaking hands, the racing pulse, the number glowing on a screen. And fear is a master of sense knowledge. It always has one more fact ready, one more data point, one more reason to keep you standing right where it wants you. Revelation knowledge is different. It is what the Word declares true, regardless of what the senses report. Not a denial of what the eyes see, but a higher court, sitting above it. And here is the trap almost everyone falls into, without ever noticing they fell into it. They think if they just gather one more fact, one more reassurance, one more search result, the fear will finally quiet down. Picture a Tuesday evening. You leave an appointment with some vague, unsettled phrase, still hanging in the air. Something like, we should keep an eye on this. And the moment you sit down in the car, The senses take the wheel. You replay the tone of voice. You remember the half-second pause before the words came. You recall a relative whose story started the same way and did not end well. By the time you pull into the driveway, you have built an entire case using nothing but memory and inflection. So what do you do next? You go inside, you open your phone, you type the exact phrase into a search bar, and for the next 40 minutes, you read strangers describing their worst nights, most of it frightening, some of it contradicting itself, and you close the phone feeling heavier than when you opened it. And here is what almost nobody notices in that moment. You were not gathering information at all. You were feeding fear fresh evidence on ground. Fear chose. The search bar is fear's home ground. The comment section is fear's home ground. The mental tally you keep of every symptom and every bad sign is fear's home ground. And no amount of research will ever out-argue a spirit whose entire strategy is evidence. This is exactly what Kenyon meant. The shift is not to stop noticing what is real. It is to stop letting what is real be the final ruling. So instead of the sixth search, the third reread, the fifth recheck of the balance, hoping the digits rearrange themselves into better news, you speak the higher word once, plainly, and then you take one obedient step, close the phone, make the call that actually needs making, breathe, and act from that footing, instead of returning to the evidence for a verdict it was never qualified to give. My decree is, I do not answer fear with fear's evidence. I answer from a higher court. The fourth law is, and this is the first deep one, so stay with me through it. The order you give fear only carries weight because of a legal standing you already possess, not one you are trying to earn. And Kenyon spent enormous energy teaching believers about their identification with the finished work, the idea that you are not approaching fear as a beggar hoping to be heard. You are approaching it as someone already seated in authority. And this single distinction is the difference between commanding a room and pleading with it. So let's take this apart slowly, in several pieces, because it is the piece almost everyone skips past on their way to wanting the quick feeling of relief. First, consider the legal picture Kenyon painted. He often used the language of a document, a will, a deed, something already signed, sealed, and in force before you ever felt a single emotion about it. When a will has been signed and witnessed, the inheritance is legally the heir's the moment the testator dies. Whether or not the heir feels wealthy yet, whether or not the heir has opened a bank statement to prove it, the feeling comes later, sometimes much later. But the legal reality was fixed the day the document was signed, and Kenyon taught that your standing against fear works the exact same way. The authority was not granted the moment you finally felt brave enough. It was granted the moment you were joined to the finished work. So when fear tries to make you feel small and shaky before it will even consider leaving, it is demanding proof of feeling for something that was already settled by document. And here is the part that changes everything. Once it lands, you do not owe fear that proof. You are not on trial. You are the one holding the deed. Second, consider what this means for the actual tone of the words you use. If the authority is already yours, then commanding fear is not an act of hope. It is an act of enforcement. Think of a landlord who owns a building outright. Every brick, every wire, every square foot already paid for and recorded at the courthouse. When an unauthorized tenant refuses to leave, the landlord does not stand at the door wringing his hands hoping the tenant feels generous. The landlord does not offer a longer, more emotional explanation of why he deserves the space. The landlord simply enforces an existing right, calm, plain, unbothered by whether the tenant likes it. That is the tone Kenyon wanted believers to carry into every fearful moment. Not a shaky, please leave me alone. Not a hopeful, maybe you will listen this time, but a settled, this space is not yours. And notice the difference is not about confidence you scraped together on your own that morning. It is about knowing the deed is already filed in your name, whether you feel confident or not. Confidence is a mood. Standing is a fact, and Kenyon never confused the two. Third, consider how differently this plays out on an ordinary, unremarkable, difficult day. Picture a man named Daniel. Nothing dramatic about his morning. He wakes up and his chest is tight before his feet even touch the floor. No clear reason, just that familiar pressure sitting there like it always does. The old pattern for Daniel, the one he lived in for years, was to ask himself, "Why do I feel this way?" and then spend the next hour managing the feeling, breathing exercises, distraction, checking the news, checking his phone, trying every trick to talk the tightness down before he could face the day underneath it. The new pattern, standing on this fourth law, is different in one specific way. Before Daniel does anything else, before he even reaches for his phone, he asks a different question entirely. Not why do I feel this way, but what is my legal standing here? And he answers it out loud, quietly, into the empty room. I am seated in authority. This fear has no claim on a house it does not own. And then, this is the part people miss. He does not wait for the tightness to disappear before he gets up. He gets up anyway, brushes his teeth anyway, makes the coffee anyway, walks out the door anyway, not because the fear vanished the instant he spoke, like some kind of magic trick, but because Daniel is no longer waiting to feel like the owner before he acts like the owner he already is. That gap right there between waiting to feel like an owner and acting like the owner you already are is the entire fourth law compressed into one morning. Fourth, consider it from one more angle still, because this one is easy to miss. A citizen does not stop being a citizen the moment they feel unpatriotic on a given afternoon. Their passport does not expire because their mood dipped. The document holds even when the feeling wobbles, and that is precisely the kind of holding Kenyon was describing. Your standing against fear is not reissued every morning based on how brave you happen to feel when the alarm goes off. It was issued once, it is filed, it is permanent, and your job is never to manufacture the feeling of authority from scratch each day. Your job is simply to remember the filing already exists and act from it. So this week, when the tightness rises before your feet ever hit the floor, resist the old question, "Why do I feel this way?" and ask instead, "What is my legal standing here?" Answer it out loud even if your voice shakes a little saying it, and then move. Get up, get dressed, do the next right thing, not waiting for the fear to leave first, moving as the one who already holds the deed. My decree is, my standing was settled before my feelings arrived, and I act on the settlement, not on the mood. If that landed with any weight in you, take a breath, because before the fifth law, hear this. If this teaching is helping you see fear differently, subscribe now so tomorrow's teaching finds you the same way. It takes 1 second, and it keeps the next lesson from passing you by. The fifth law is short, and it is meant to sting a little because it is so obvious once you see it. Fear cannot read your private feelings. It cannot see the ache behind your eyes or the weight sitting on your chest. It can only respond to what you actually say out loud. Kenyon taught what he sometimes called the confession of the mouth. The plain idea that what you confess you tend to possess, and here is the sting. Most people spend their whole day silently confessing fear's report without ever noticing they are doing it. Think of a woman named Carol, waiting on test results. She never once shouted a fearful prayer or made a dramatic declaration. She simply muttered small lines all day long, under her breath at the sink. In the car at red lights, lying in bed at night, I just know this is going to go wrong. I can't shake this feeling. This always happens to people like me. And every single one of those small lines was a confession, whether she meant it that way or not. Fear does not care about intention. It does not pause to ask, Did you mean that as a real declaration, or just a passing thought? It only hears the words leaving the mouth and treats them as an open door. And this is the part almost nobody catches. You can feel calm on the inside for a moment and still be handing fear a signed invitation with your lips, because the mouth speaks faster than the feelings can keep up with it. So this week, catch yourself mid-sentence. Notice the small phrases slipping out about how afraid, how doomed, how certain disaster feels, and the instant you hear yourself starting down that road, stop, and do not finish the sentence the old way. Let the sentence die unfinished, rather than let it become one more confession fear collects. My decree is, my mouth is not fear's microphone anymore. It is mine. The sixth law is, what you confess you possess. So the real work is not a single dramatic command shouted once. It is a daily rebuilding of the words you plant. Kenyon taught that confession is not a one-time event. It is closer to gardening. You do not plant a seed on Monday and expect the harvest to arrive by Tuesday afternoon. You water, you tend, you keep speaking the same true word over the same ground, even when nothing visible has changed yet. And this is exactly where most people give up on the whole idea of commanding fear. They speak the order once. Fear does not vanish forever in that instant, and they conclude the method failed. But Kenyon would say, the method did not fail. The watering stopped too soon. And here is the part almost nobody tells you. A seed left unwatered does not simply stay the same. It dries out. So silence is never neutral ground. If you stop watering the true word, you have not paused the garden. You have handed the whole bed over to whatever else is blowing through the air. And fear always has seeds of its own, drifting nearby, ready to root in soil you left bare. Picture two neighbors with the exact same small garden bed outside their kitchen window. Both plant the same seed on the same morning. Both get the same forecast of storms that week. The first neighbor waters once, feels good about it, and then gets busy, forgets, tells herself the seed will manage on its own, since she already did her part. By Friday, her bed is cracked dry, and whatever pushed through is thin and pale. The second neighbor waters a little every single morning. Some mornings it is only a minute, some mornings barely a cupful. Nothing dramatic. By Friday, her bed is soft, dark, and already showing the first small green shoots pushing up through the surface. The seed was identical. The forecast was identical. The only difference was who kept showing up with the water after the excitement of planting had worn off. And notice something else in that same small yard. The second neighbor never once stood over the bed waiting for the shoot to appear. Before she watered again, she did not measure her morning cupful by whether yesterday's cupful had visibly worked yet. She watered because it was morning. That alone was the whole reason, and this is the part Kenyon kept returning to. The word is not measured by whether it feels like it landed. It is measured by whether it was spoken. Faith does not wait for proof before it waters again. This is precisely what Kenyon meant when he spoke of confession as something you live in, rather than something you perform once. Picture two people getting the same frightening diagnosis on the same morning. One of them speaks the higher word once in the parking lot, feels a small wave of relief, and then spends the rest of the week rehearsing every worst-case scenario in the shower, in the car, before bed. The other speaks the same higher word in the parking lot, and then keeps speaking it. Morning coffee, red light at the intersection, before opening the laptop, last thing before sleep, not frantically, just steadily, like watering a garden bed already planted. By the end of the week, these two people are living in two different atmospheres, even though the outward diagnosis has not changed for either of them. One is still negotiating with fear all day long. The other has simply made the order so routine that fear finds less and less bare ground to root in. And here is a smaller, quieter version of the same principle. a man waiting on word about whether his position at work would survive a coming round of layoffs. He did not have a single dramatic parking lot moment at all. What he had was a folded scrap of paper in his shirt pocket, with one line written on it: "This house is not fears to keep." And every time his hand brushed that pocket, reaching for keys, reaching for his phone, reaching for nothing in particular, he felt the paper and spoke the line under his breath. Not once a day, a dozen small times a day, tiny waterings scattered through hours that had nothing dramatic in them at all. And by the time the actual announcement came, whatever it turned out to be, he noticed he had already been standing on solid ground for weeks. Not because the news was good, but because the ground had been watered every single day leading up to it. This is not magical thinking. It is consistency. The same reason one conversation with a friend rarely fixes a strained relationship, but months of small, honest exchanges do. The same reason a single workout never built the body, but showing up again and again quietly did. So ask yourself honestly, where in your week did you plant a true word once and then walk away from it, expecting one watering to carry you clear through to harvest? That gap is not a failure of the word. It is simply an invitation to come back tomorrow morning with the cup in your hand again. My decree is, I water the word daily, and I let the harvest take the time it takes. The seventh law is the deepest one. So let's slow all the way down and walk through an entire ordinary day together, hour by hour. Because until you see this principle laid out across real clock time instead of one dramatic moment, it stays a nice idea you admire instead of a tool you actually use. And here is why this matters more than any other law in this whole teaching. Fear does not usually attack you once, dramatically, in one clean confrontation you can win and be done with. Fear attacks in small skirmishes, a dozen tiny border crossings scattered across a single, ordinary day, and most people lose, not because they lack authority, but because they never noticed how many times the border was actually crossed. They think of fear as one large storm on one bad night, when really it is 100 small drips finding 100 small cracks. So let's follow one person through one day and watch every single crack. Call him a man named David. He drives a delivery route. Nothing dramatic about his life, no crisis on the news, just an ordinary Tuesday. And watch how many times fear tries the door before lunch even arrives. First, consider 6 in the morning. The alarm sounds, and before David's feet even touch the floor, a small dread arrives uninvited about the day ahead. A difficult customer on today's route, a bill sitting unopened on the counter, and in the old pattern, he would lie there 3 or 4 minutes marinating in that dread, letting the senses give their report before he has even stood up, letting the body's tightness set the tone for the next 16 hours. In the new pattern, he speaks before his feet ever hit the floor, out loud or in a whisper. This day is not fears to run. And notice what that actually does. It is not a magic phrase that erases the customer or pays the bill. It simply refuses to let the first voice of the day be the loudest one. Second, consider 7:30. David is getting dressed, and a memory surfaces of the last time a route like today's went badly. A shouting customer, a wasted afternoon, and here the old pattern is to rehearse that old failure like a rerun, letting yesterday's defeat write today's script before today has even opened its mouth. The new pattern is to interrupt that rerun mid-scene. That was a different day. This word governs this one. Small, quiet, but it breaks the loop before the loop finishes forming. Third, consider 8 in the morning. David is in traffic, and someone cuts him off, and his heart jumps, and an old anxious pattern about being late tries to grab the wheel. This looks small, but it matters enormously, because fear rarely announces itself with trumpets and drama. It usually slides in through small irritations, small delays, small frustrations that arrive too fast for you to notice they are even fear at all. And the order here is equally small. I am not late for anything that truly matters. I stay steady in this seat. Fourth, consider noon. David checks his phone at a red light, and there is a message from his landlord he has been dreading. The stomach drops immediately. The old pattern is to read it 3 or 4 times, scanning for hidden meaning, spiraling through every possible bad outcome before he has even finished the first sentence. The new pattern, before opening it at all, he speaks, "Whatever this says, I already stand in power and love and a sound mind." And only then does he open it once, slowly, and he responds from that footing rather than from the drop in his stomach. This is not pretending the message cannot hurt. It is refusing to let the sting arrive before the standing does. Fifth, consider 3 in the afternoon. David's energy is low. The last stops of the route feel heavier than the first, and low energy is fear's favorite hour of the entire day, because your guard is thinnest exactly when your body is most tired. This is the hour. People snap at coworkers over nothing, doubt decisions they made confidently that morning, replay old failures they thought they had already put down, and the order here is almost physical rather than mental. A short pause, 3 slow breaths in the cab of the truck, and the same line spoken quietly under his breath. I am not managed by low energy. Sixth, consider 6 in the evening. David is home now, the route finished, and the mind finally has room to wander toward tomorrow's unresolved worries. The landlord still not answered, the money still not settled, and this is the hour Kenyon would say. The discipline of the tongue matters most of all, because there is no urgent task left to distract him, just him and his own thoughts filling the quiet. And if he does not speak the order here, the silence will fill itself with fear's monologue. By default, it always does. Silence is never actually empty. It is simply waiting to be filled by whichever voice speaks first. So he speaks it anyway, into the quiet kitchen. Tomorrow is not fear's either. Seventh, consider 8 in the evening. Dinner is done, the house has settled, and a smaller, sneakier fear tries a different angle now. Not urgency, but comparison. The thought that his brother seems to have it all figured out, a steadier job, a paid-off car, that he himself is somehow behind. And this is fear, wearing a mask of shame instead of dread. And the order still applies, because the spirit behind both masks is the same one. I measure nothing tonight. I simply stand. Eighth, consider 10 at night. David lying down, the day's residue settling into the mattress with him, and this is the exact hour we started with at the very beginning of this teaching, the 2 in the morning ache that made you find this video in the first place. And here is what is different now. He does not lie there hoping the feeling passes on its own, like weather. He speaks the same 3-part word one more time before sleep. Fear has no lease on this house. I speak, and it has to obey the word. I stand tonight in power and love and a sound mind. Fear, you must go now. And then he actually lets himself sleep on that word rather than on fear's report. Now notice what just happened across David's entire day. And notice it is your day too, under a different name. It was never one dramatic exorcism performed once at sunrise and then forgotten. It was 8 or 9 small orders given at 8 or 9 small pressure points. Morning, traffic, the dreaded message, the afternoon slump, evening quiet, the comparison hour, the pillow, each one small, each one repeated, each one backed by the same standing you learned about earlier in this teaching. None of them loud, none of them theatrical, and that is precisely the point. This is what Kenyon meant by living the word rather than merely believing it as a theory you admire on Sundays and forget by Tuesday. It is not one grand stand you take once. It is dozens of small stands taken all day long until standing becomes the default posture rather than the exception. And here is the part worth sitting with a moment longer. If David had only spoken the word at 6 in the morning and nowhere else, fear would have simply waited for 8 o'clock traffic to try again. And if he had won at traffic but gone silent through the afternoon slump, fear would have simply waited there instead. Fear is patient in exactly the way water is patient. It does not need to win the whole day. It only needs one unguarded hour. So the answer is not to find the one perfect hour and defend it fiercely. The answer is to stop leaving any hour completely unguarded. Pause for a moment right now and pick one real hour from your own actual week. A specific hour when fear reliably shows up for you. Maybe it is the drive to work. Maybe it is the moment you open your banking app. Maybe it is the last 20 minutes before you fall asleep. And decide right now, before you move on to anything else, what single line you will speak at that exact hour, starting tomorrow. That is the whole practice, reduced to its simplest form. 1 hour, 1 order, repeated until it becomes as automatic and unthinking as locking your front door, before bed. And then next week you add a second hour, and the week after a third, until the small skirmishes that used to catch you off guard start finding a door that is already closed. My decree is, I give the order at every hour fear tries to claim, not just the hour I happen to remember to. The 8th law is, fear will come back, and that return is not proof that your authority failed. Kenyon was honest about this. He never taught that speaking the word once made a person permanently immune to every future wave of dread. He taught that the authority is permanent, even when the pressure is recurring. And this is the law almost everyone quietly needs to hear, because almost everyone has had this exact experience. You speak the word, you feel the wave of peace. You go to bed thinking it is finally settled, and then 2 weeks later, sometimes 2 days later, the same tight chest shows up again, maybe about a different subject entirely, and something in you sinks lower than before the first time, because now it is not just fear. It is fear plus the disappointment of thinking you had already won this fight. Think of a lighthouse standing on a rocky coast. The storms do not stop coming just because the lighthouse stood firm through the last 40 storms. The lighthouse's job was never to prevent weather from forming out at sea. It was only ever to stand steady while weather passed through. And no one walks down to the shore after storm number 40 and says the lighthouse is broken because a new storm is rolling in on the horizon. That would be absurd. The storm rolling in says nothing about the lighthouse at all. It simply says the sea is still the sea. Now picture a man named Daniel, who spoke this word over a job loss, stood in it for a full month, watched a new position open up, and told everyone who would listen that he had finally learned how to handle fear. And then 6 months later, the company announced layoffs again. And the old dread came rushing back into his chest before he had even heard whether his own name was on the list. And for a moment, he felt something worse than fear. He felt like a fraud, as if the first victory had been an accident that was now being exposed, but nothing had been exposed at all. A new wave had simply reached the same shore, and the same standing that met the first layoff was already available to meet the second one. He did not have to invent a new authority for a new circumstance. He only had to recognize the old one showing up again in different clothing. This is exactly where so many people quietly give up on this whole teaching. They treat every return of fear as evidence that the method does not work, as though one storm getting past the lighthouse once would mean the whole coastline should be abandoned, when Kenyon would say the return of fear is simply evidence that you are still alive in a world that has not yet been fully quieted. The lighthouse does not get discouraged by the tide, and neither should you get discouraged by fear circling back wearing a slightly different face. Maybe about your health this time instead of your income, or about a child instead of a marriage. The response is not despair that it came back. The response is calm recognition. I know you. I have met you before. You still have to obey the same word you obeyed last time. Notice too what this changes about how you measure your own progress. You stop counting a good week as proof and a hard week as failure. You stop grading yourself by whether fear shows up at all, and you start grading yourself by how quickly you remember the standing you already hold. Some weeks that recognition takes 5 minutes. Some weeks it takes until nightfall. Both are still victories because the lighthouse was never judged by how fast the storm arrived, only by whether it kept standing once it did. And this is actually good news properly understood, because it means you are never starting from zero. You are never rebuilding your authority storm by storm from nothing. You are simply drawing again on the same standing, the same document, the same signed word that was already true before either you or this new fear ever met on this particular shore. The storms test the lighthouse. They do not undo it. They never did. My decree is, I do not lose ground just because fear returns. I simply stand again. The 9th law is, all of this authority was never something you had to build from nothing. It was something you were given as part of who you already are. And Kenyon called this a new creation reality, meaning your right to command fear is not a reward you earn through enough discipline or enough good days in a row. It is closer to an inheritance you finally learn to use. And think about how strange that actually is once you sit with it. Because for years, you may have approached fear the way a tenant approaches a landlord, knocking politely, hoping for mercy, negotiating for a little peace and quiet, when the whole time the deed to the house was already in your name. Picture a man who inherited a house from a relative he barely knew. The paperwork was signed years ago, the deed filed, the house legally his the moment the estate closed, and yet for months he kept parking outside on the street, sleeping in his car some nights, telling himself he did not want to intrude, until finally someone who actually knew the law sat him down and said, "You are not intruding. You own this. Walk in. Use the key that has been sitting in your pocket the whole time." And when he finally did, nothing about the house had changed. The rooms were the same. The roof was the same. The only thing that changed was that he stopped living like a guest in his own inheritance. This is exactly what Kenyon meant. You were never building a new power to fight fear with. You were only remembering a power that was already recorded in your name before fear ever showed up at the door. And once that finally settles into you, the whole posture softens. You stop bracing for fear's next visit, like a soldier waiting on an ambush at every turn. And you start living more like that man once he finally walked inside his own house, unhurried, steady, at rest, not because trouble never comes near again, but because you are no longer sleeping outside your own inheritance, waiting for permission that was granted long before you asked. My decree is, I rest in what was already given, and I let that rest be my strength. Here is the whole picture. It is not a feeling you calm. It is a spirit you command. It is not evidence from the senses that gets the final word. It is revelation that outranks it. It is not a status you earn through enough fear-free days. It is a standing already signed and sealed before you ever felt a thing. It is not one dramatic sentence spoken once. It is a word watered daily like a garden. It is not silence that protects you. It is your mouth that either feeds fear or starves it. It is not 1 hour of victory. It is every hour of the day getting the same small order. It is not permanent immunity from fear's return. It is a lighthouse that simply stands again each time the storm circles back. And it is not a power you build. It is an inheritance you finally remember to use. 9 laws, one single key turning again and again. The recognition that fear is a spirit, and a spirit answers only to a command. If you want to keep this authority active every single day, instead of only remembering it during a video like this one, That is exactly what the daily practice was built for. A short, guided daily routine, just a few minutes each morning and night, walking you through the same orders we practiced together today. So this becomes as automatic as locking the door. It is available now for a small one-time cost, with a full refund if it does not serve you. The link is in the description below. And if you are ready to stop negotiating with fear and start commanding it, that is where to begin. Say it with me one more time. Fear has no lease on this house. I speak, and it has to obey the word. I stand today in power and love and a sound mind. Fear, you must go now. Fear is a spirit, and now you know the one order it has to obey. So give it, and go live like it already left.